I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have security cameras all over my property. But after moving into Oakwood Estates 6 months ago, I quickly realized they weren't just a luxury. They were a necessity. Not because of criminals, mind you, but because of something far more invasive, our HOA president, Karen Wilcox. From the moment I moved in, Karen made it her personal mission to welcome me to the neighborhood by handing me a 3-ring binder containing all 178 pages of the Homeowners Association bylaws. "I suggest you memorize these," she told me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I run a tight ship here in Oakwood Estates. We don't tolerate rule breakers. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, and my job involves designing security systems. So when Karen started making routine inspections of everyone's front yards without notice, measuring grass height with an actual ruler, and taking photos of any infraction, I decided to protect myself. I installed a comprehensive security system throughout my property, doorbell camera, motion sensors, the works. Not because I was paranoid, but because something about Karen's obsessive enforcement made me uneasy. My garage became my sanctuary, a place where I could tinker with electronics projects on weekends. I kept it meticulously organized, not to comply with HOA standards, but because precision is part of who I am. Everything had its place: tools mounted on pegboards, shelves neatly labeled, floor clean enough to eat off of. I'd installed extra security measures there too, motion-activated cameras with instant alerts to my phone. It wasn't that I expected anyone to break in, but my equipment was valuable, and I prefer to be safe rather than sorry. The trouble began when I received a violation notice about my garage door being left open for excessive periods of time. According to Karen's letter, the HOA bylaws stated that garage doors should remain closed when not in active use for aesthetic purposes and neighborhood security. I checked the bylaws, and while there was indeed such a rule, it defined excessive as overnight or during homeowner absence, neither of which applied to my Saturday afternoon tinkering sessions. I wrote a polite but firm response citing the exact bylaw and its defined terms, explaining that my garage door was only open while I was actively working inside, well within the permitted guidelines. I dropped it in Karen's mailbox. She insisted all HOA correspondence go directly to her rather than through email. Digital communications lack accountability, she'd once announced at a neighborhood meeting. 3 days later, I received another notice. This one claimed that visible storage of non-automotive items in the garage violates Section 23.4 of the bylaws. Again, I checked. Section 23.4 only prohibited storage that was visible from the street when the garage door was closed. When open, the only stipulation was that the garage should not present an obvious hazard or eyesore. My clean, organized workbench was neither. I was beginning to suspect Karen was making up rules as she went along. This time, I requested an in-person meeting and documented everything, bringing printed photos of my garage from the street view, with annotations citing the relevant bylaw sections. Karen's face grew progressively redder as I calmly presented my evidence. "The spirit of the rules is what matters," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Your garage has been reported by concerned neighbors as not being primarily used for vehicle storage." "Which neighbors?" I asked. "I'd like to address their concerns directly." "That information is confidential," she replied, shuffling papers on her immaculate dining room table where we sat. As HOA president, I protect the anonymity of community reporters. I strongly suspected there were no concerned neighbors at all. "Well, Karen, since we can't seem to agree on the interpretation of the bylaws, perhaps we should bring this up at the next HOA meeting for clarification," I suggested. Her eye twitched slightly. "That won't be necessary. I'll review your documentation and get back to you." I thought that might be the end of it, but Karen Wilcox was not someone who admitted defeat easily. A week passed without further notices, and I began to relax, thinking the matter was resolved. I continued my weekend project, building a custom drone for a friend's agricultural business, and kept my garage in its usual pristine condition. Then came that fateful Saturday. I'd gone grocery shopping, expecting to be back within an hour to continue working on my project. My phone buzzed while I was in the checkout line, a security alert. I opened the app to see footage of someone in my garage. At first, I thought it might be a glitch or perhaps a neighbor's child who'd wandered in. But when I zoomed in, I recognized the perfectly coiffed blonde bob and floral print dress immediately. Karen was inside my garage, opening drawers and taking photos. My heart pounded as I watched her methodically document my workspace, lifting tools and examining them before replacing them, often in slightly different positions. She was wearing latex gloves, like some kind of crime scene investigator. The timestamp showed she'd been there for nearly 15 minutes already, moving with the confidence of someone who believed they had every right to be there. I abandoned my shopping cart and drove home immediately, the security feed still playing on my phone mounted to the dashboard. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Karen had moved to my workbench and was photographing the drone components, making notes on a clipboard she'd brought with her. The garage door was closed. She must have entered through the side door, which I now realized had slight marks around the lock. Rather than confront her immediately, I parked on the street and called the non-emergency police line. "I'm watching someone who has broken into my home on my security cameras right now," I explained calmly. "She's currently in my garage going through my belongings. I have clear video evidence of the break-in." The dispatcher advised me to stay away until officers arrived, which I agreed to do. I continued watching the feed as Karen methodically documented everything in my garage, occasionally shaking her head disapprovingly or writing something down. She seemed completely unaware that her every move was being recorded from 3 different angles, or that silent alerts had been steadily pinging my phone from the moment she triggered the first motion sensor. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up without sirens. I approached the officers and briefly explained the situation, showing them the live feed on my phone. "That's Karen Wilcox, the HOA president," I explained. "She's entered my home without permission and has been searching through my belongings for almost half an hour now." One officer raised his eyebrows. "HOA disputes aren't typically police matters, sir." "This isn't an HOA dispute," I clarified. "This is breaking and entering. I never gave her permission to enter my property, especially not in my absence. There are visible signs of forced entry on my side door, and I have continuous footage showing she's been through every drawer and cabinet in my garage." The officers exchanged glances, and the senior one nodded. "Let's go talk to her." I stayed behind them as they approached my garage's side door and knocked firmly. "Police, open the door, please." When there was no immediate response, they knocked again more forcefully. The door swung open to reveal Karen, clipboard in hand, looking momentarily confused before her expression hardened into indignation. "Officers, what seems to be the problem?" "Ma'am, do you have permission to be in this residence?" the senior officer asked. Karen straightened her posture. "I'm conducting an official HOA inspection. As president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, I have the right to inspect properties for compliance." "Do you have documentation of that right? Or a key provided by the homeowner?" the officer continued. Karen's confidence wavered slightly. "The bylaws give the HOA board authority to ensure community standards are maintained. The homeowner has received multiple violation notices and has been uncooperative." The younger officer turned to me. "Sir, did you provide this woman with permission to enter your home or a key to your property?" "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "Furthermore, I have security footage showing her entering through that door, which appears to have been tampered with. I've never authorized any HOA member to enter my property without my presence or explicit permission." Karen's face flushed. "The bylaws clearly state." "Ma'am," the senior officer interrupted, "Homeowners Association bylaws don't override state trespassing laws. I'd like to see the document that you believe gives you the right to enter private residences without the owner's permission." Karen began flipping through her clipboard frantically. "I don't have it with me, but Section 42 clearly states that the board can inspect properties for violations. This garage has multiple violations that needed documentation. Regardless of any HOA regulations, you cannot legally enter someone's home without their permission," the officer explained patiently. "That constitutes breaking and entering, which is a criminal offense." The reality of her situation seemed to dawn on Karen as her eyes widened. This is ridiculous. I was simply doing my job as HOA president. The community depends on me to maintain standards. The officers asked Karen to step outside, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly as she clutched her clipboard. The senior officer turned to me. "Sir, would you be willing to show us the security footage and any damage to your door?" I led them to the side door first, where clear tool marks were visible around the lock. Then I played back the security footage on my phone, starting from the moment Karen approached my side door, worked on the lock for several minutes, and then entered. The footage continued, showing her methodical search through my garage, opening drawers, taking photos, and examining my belongings. I have continuous footage of the entire 28 minutes she was in my garage before you arrived, I explained. As you can see, she's wearing gloves and going through every cabinet and drawer. Karen watched the video playback with increasing horror. "Those cameras are an invasion of privacy," she suddenly exclaimed. "The HOA bylaws require approval for exterior security installations." The younger officer shook his head. "Ma'am, homeowners have every right to install security cameras on their own property. And right now, those cameras have documented what appears to be breaking and entering and possibly attempted theft." "Theft?" Karen's voice rose to a near shriek. "I wasn't stealing anything. I was documenting violations." "Then why are you wearing gloves, Karen?" I asked quietly. "And why did you enter when you knew I wasn't home?" The senior officer turned to her. "Ma'am, at this point, I need to advise you of your rights." He proceeded to read her Miranda rights while she stood there, the color draining from her face. As they escorted Karen to the police cruiser, neighbors began emerging from their homes, watching with undisguised curiosity. Karen kept her head high, though her hands trembled as she was guided into the back seat. "This is all a misunderstanding," she insisted loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I was conducting official HOA business." I gave my statement to the officers, providing them with digital copies of all the security footage. They informed me that Karen would likely be charged with breaking and entering, trespassing, and possibly attempted burglary due to the premeditated nature of her actions, as evidenced by the gloves and tools she'd used on my lock. 2 weeks later, an emergency meeting of the Oakwood Estates HOA, Karen sat stiffly in a chair to the side rather than at her usual position at the head of the table. The vice president ran the meeting, explaining to the packed room that Karen had been removed from the board following her arrest. The criminal charges against her had been reduced through a plea agreement, but she was facing significant legal fees, community service, and a restraining order preventing her from coming within 100 feet of my property. As the meeting concluded with a vote for a new HOA president, Karen stood up, her face a mask of indignation. "This community will fall apart without proper leadership," she announced, her voice quavering. "I did what was necessary to maintain our standards and property values." When no one responded, she gathered her designer purse and walked stiffly toward the exit. As she reached the door, she turned back, eyes glistening with unshed tears of anger, and caught my gaze. "I hope you're satisfied," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've destroyed everything I've worked for." With that, she pushed through the door, the sound of her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway as the room erupted into conversation behind her.